Hello, good morning.
Good morning. How are you, Sherry?
Oh my gosh, my head is so happy and my heart is so excited about all this talk about door knocking and economic populism and just, how do we expand the vote? I'm just delighted that we're all thinking and talking about things that matter every second. How about you?
I'm okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I've recovered from the semester, and I'm going up for full professor, so I'm working on that.
Wow.
Forgive me, do you prefer doctor or do you prefer Phoebe? I want to be respectful
I
of that.
prefer Phoebe. Yeah, no,
Okay.
I'm not into that, but I'm into getting some more money. I'm going up for full professor in residence. I'm not a tenure track person, and so with full professor, I will make the same as a incoming out of grad school tenure track.
Well, hopefully you're not looking for tenure at University of North Carolina.
Hopefully not. I know, I saw that.
What a shame. But that said, I just want to very briefly introduce myself. I'm Joe Carvalho. I'm not sure if we've had a chance to speak yet. I'm going to be doing tech for this session. But just for what it's worth, it might not be worth much, but thank you so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it.
No, I take being a sociologist very seriously, and I think we have a moral obligation to share what we know. So I appreciate being asked.
So I think the way that this has worked for previous sessions is that, and forgive me, I'm sure that you and Sherry have spoken and or Chris, but we have Sherry kind of introduce you, and then after the introduction, you kind of take it away for however long, and then we kind of open it up for questions, where we have been directing questions through the chat. There have been a few people who've raised their hands, and so long as it's not people jumping over one another to speak, that's been okay, because there's only one person who had raised their hand. But that said, we're generally directing people to the chat, but things happen organically, and that's okay. We don't have to stick to the script.
Breakout groups. Is that? I assume that's an option. I'm not as familiar with Zoom as WebEx.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with Zoom as I am Teams, and I actually wasn't prepared to do breakout rooms. I'm not sure if I know how. I'm happy to try. It's 11 a.m. right now. I'm not. Okay.
I mean, if not, we can scrap it. It's easier for people to talk about personal or intimate stuff.
Right.
In a small group.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I should have.
And we're running at about 20 people. Although we have 47 signed up, that your workshop was the highest vote getter, so to speak. We're running at about 20, 25 people because we're thinking the weather is nice. People are doing other Saturday morning activities. And so, and everyone has been pretty, dare I say, shy.
Okay, well, I'm just going to change my slide to discussion.
Okay.
So sorry about that, Phoebe.
That's okay. No, that's fine.
So, let's see. How many people do we have waiting? We've got about 18 people in the waiting room, and there's always some people that will join after that.
Okay.
Phoebe, are you comfortable with me allowing people in the room and then Sherry kind of doing her intro while you kind of get set up, or did you need an additional minute or so?
That's fine.
Okay.
I mean, if you want, tell me when I can share my screen, but I want to be a bigger screen before I share my screen. So
absolutely.
I assume I have permission to share. Yeah.
Yes, you do.
Okay.
You do, absolutely. So I think the way it's going to work is currently you and Sherry are both spotlighted. The way it's going to work is that Sherry will do an intro. I will then unspotlight her. Once you are the only person on the screen, feel free whenever you'd like after that, once you are the only person being spotlighted, to share your screen whenever you'd like.
Okay.
And and if you want to look for me, I'll give you a thumbs up too. So that said, I am going to admit folks. I'm going to do that right meow.
You have great birds, Joe.
Somebody has great birds. Yeah.
Yeah, they're Joe. All my doors are closed because the neighbor's mowing. So great birds. Okay, full screen. I'm gonna do gallery. All right. Well, here we are. We're all popping in. Good morning to all. Here we are. It's very exciting to have so many people care about so many great things in Connecticut on a Saturday morning. And I am just delighted to be here today listening to some speakers where I am ready to door knock. I'm ready for a clipboard. I'm ready to get out and do some great, not activism, but invitation, right? We want to bring people into the fold. We want to make sure that our neighbors and friends here in Connecticut feel welcome and safe in order to participate. And so today, my last workshop, I feel particularly connected to because when we had our work group, it was what I thought we needed to talk about, which is racism in Northeastern Connecticut, which is the fact that it blows my mind that it's still a thing. And when people think about Connecticut that live in another place, they think that we don't have such issues here. I work for Hartford Healthcare, and we have visiting nurses and visiting people that will go to doors to provide a service and are told, no, thank you. You're not welcome here. And that blows my mind. And so I knew that we needed to talk about this as a, grassroots topic. And so this winter, I had a young lady staying with me, one of Heather's friends, and she said, oh my gosh, I've got this awesome professor at UCONN. I think you should talk to her. So I did. And so I called Dr. Phoebe Godfrey, who is an associate professor in Residence of Sociology at UCONN. And we talked for an hour. I could, literally listen to her every single day. I'm going to find out if she's got a podcast. I might just want to be her new best friend.
Thank you.
And I'm hopeful that after this, as we're all inspired, she lives in Willimantic, that maybe there is next steps that we can get to and other things that we can be invited to be our best selves. And so I am going to let Phoebe introduce herself. I want to let you know that at 11:45, I'll give a soft nudge. Then at 10 of, it gets pretty hard, and we're going to be wrapping it up. And we're off at 5 of, so that you can use the bathroom and get a drink before we have Senator Murphy and Congressman Himes at the end. It is going to be, if you have questions, just put them up in the chat room. Joe Corvallo is our tech person. I'm moderating a little bit, and this is just an amazing opportunity for us to talk about something that is so important to Connecticut and the country. So without further ado, thank you, Dr.
Adding on the. All right, thank you so much for inviting me, and we're up a bit, and so being online again, hopefully next time this happens, it'll be in person. So I'm going to invite you to do some contemplation and to kind of get into thinking about this topic that many avoid, particularly if you identify as white. If you don't identify as white, you can't avoid this. And that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about, and presenting an intersectional analysis of racism, and recognizing that we cannot separate these identities. And that's also part of what we need to do in order to unpack them, is recognize how intimately they are interwoven. So I'm going to just begin, like I said, by sharing my screen, and we'll get to the title. And the title was sort of motivated by Sherry asking me to speak on this topic. And I said, okay, sure, I can do that. Can you all see that? And I'm going to put it to the view version. and or the presentation version. Sorry about that.
That
Oops.
looks great.
Yeah, but I want to make it where the which one is, oh, the slideshow. Yes, that's the one from the beginning. There we go. Okay. Yeah. And this question, is there racism in the quiet corner, and intersectional analysis? And I'm going to explain what intersectionality is and why it's so important. And then we're going to practice it a little bit. So to start with, who am I? And I do this in all of my classes. I get students to take a couple of weeks actually, because everything that we look at in our lives is shaped through these lenses of who am I? What body have I been put in? And whether you believe in a soul or a spirit, none of us chose these bodies. None of us chose this time period, these cultures, the geographical location in which we are born, but they become us, right? We talk about I am this, I am that. And we are socialized into them to such an extent that they seem real. And from a sociological perspective, we talk about the social construction. We say that these identities aren't actually real in any concrete way, because we know if we go to a different culture or if we go to a different part of town, there's a very different way that people are interpreting these. If you have a body that is gendered female, you will know that your mother or your grandmother's concept of gender is very different. And so that's part of the social construction. So I thought I'd just tell you, who am I? And then I'm going to have you kind of think about who you are. So I identify as white. I want to speak that because that is a privilege. And white people, we don't have to be the white professor, the white author. We don't have to be the white athlete, we're just, Phoebe or Susie or, Faulkner. We're not, that African-American writer, that Asian writer, right? I'm also middle class. And that's an identity we're going to talk a little bit about, because when we think about class among whites, we tend to erase the influence that class has. And certainly when we're talking about race, we want the racists to be working class whites. And we want middle class white people, especially Democrats, we're not the racists. So I'm owning that. I'm middle-aged. And the intersection of being middle-aged and female is very different than being middle-aged and male. I am a lesbian. I'm married to a woman, although my wife does not identify as a lesbian. I'm a leftist, which means that I am very critical of our existing system. My parents are from England, and I'm the first person of my family born in the US. And I'm also non-tenure track. So that's kind of a little bit of my identities. I've been teaching on race, class, gender, and sexualities for over 20 years. My dissertation was on revisioning Little Rock and looking at the desegregation, not just as an issue of race, which of course it was, but the role that class and gender were playing. And it was quite amazing that you really, going back, could not and should not ever think about anything in this country in our history without understanding the role that gender and sexism and classism are playing. My current focus is looking at how these issues, race, class, gender, and all of our bodied identities are creating climate change. I teach a course on climate change, and I was very delighted. If you haven't read Ta-Nehisi Coates's Between the World and Me, at the end of the book, he says, the dreamers, which are white people and particularly white middle class people, that the dreamers are creating climate change, which of course we are. And climate change is not an all human issue. We love to say anthropogenic climate change, all humans are destroying. Like, no, Indigenous people are not playing a part in this drama, but we want to kind of scoop them into it, even as historically we've pushed them out, right? So kind of historically, Indigenous people, not human, but when it comes to climate change, it's a genetic species issue, not a cultural issue. And so that's really the focus of my work right now, is on environmental destruction, environmental justice, and getting students to unpack their identities and see how those identities have created our separation in our culture from the planet to the point where we are engaging in eco and sort of species side. And I don't lecture. I'm going to invite you guys to participate. So on that note, let's start. Let's take a moment, and I invited you to look at some of these questions. So think about, who are you? And, you know, you can close your eyes if that's helpful. And just sort of, what would be your instinctual answer, right? You know, would it be, I'm Joe? Would it be, you know, or would it go into a race, class, gender qualifier? Let's take a moment. And then, you know, why are you here? What was it that you wanted from me? Often we, you know, especially if we identify as white, we go to issues around racism because we're passionate for social justice, but there's also sometimes a little bit of something else. So just kind of think about that. What do you hope to learn about others, right? Again, like I said, if you, usually when whites talk about racism, we want to focus on the others. Those are the real racists. The Republicans, the people in Scotland County, working class white people. So just kind of think about that for a moment. What do you want to learn about yourself, right? What are you hoping that'll be revealed? And then what do you hope to do with this knowledge about racism in the quiet corner? So just, again, we often want knowledge as something to put in our basket. I know that, I've got that. But then if we're asked to act on that knowledge, then we often resist. And so that is very much a part of the academy, right? It's great to write books and know stuff and get, right? But the minute you say, well, let's do something, you know, let's really impact, let's go out, let's go knock on doors, as Sherry was saying, that's not research. We're not funding that. That's a waste of, right? And so that split that we have in our culture between those who know and those who do, and that's also part of our class division. Okay, so hold on to those and we'll come back to them in a little bit. So I understood that the title got kind of shortened and sort of the question, is there racism in the quiet corner? And obviously the answer is yes, there's racism everywhere. There's racism historically. Humans have patterns of where they create identities, right? Who's in, who's out. We are the people who worship that God. You are the people who worship that God. We are the people who cut our body here. You are the people who cut their body there. Dr. Seuss, with his book on the star's belly sneetches, is one that I often use to teach about racism. It seems very simple, right? The star belly sneetches are the best. And then a wonderful capitalist comes up with a machine where you can put stars on your bellies. And then the star belly people freak out and they want the machine to have them removed, and et cetera, et cetera. So yes, but modern racism is a little different than the historical racism, the historical anti-Semitism, you know, all of the ways that humans have decided who's in, who's out. Modern racism has its intersection with science, where it became viewed that race was actually in the body rather than in the culture. Historically, slaves could gain freedom, right? You were usually a captive of a war, and then you serve your time. Even the Greeks, but the idea, and also, you can see this in India in terms of the caste system. That's also similar to modern version of race and racism. But I thought it was important to kind of sit with that. The answer is yes. And so Rhonda McGee, if you're interested in resources, wrote a fabulous book called The Inner Work of Racial Justice. And in that book, she invites people to take a pause and to just kind of sit with that. And as she says, you sort of allow the idea and the insight to take root in our minds. And very much because of her mindfulness work, we bring awareness to the body, right? And we ask, what does that feel like? So just again, take a moment if you're comfortable. And with my students, I do a lot of mini meditations. I've been sitting online with my eyes closed all semester. So just take a moment and, what does that feel like? And depending on your body, depending on your identity, this idea that racism isn't, this little thing between you and me. It isn't this thing that we can just get rid of because, we took a course or we've been doing our inner work. But that it's got this vast structural aspect, and that it also, like I said, is inseparable from sexism, from how women around the world, how LGBTQ people around the world, how poor people around the world are treated and deemed meaningless or invaluable or not worthy of having the same privileges and rights or food or shelter or any of the things that we have deemed necessary. Yeah, so just take a breath, take a pause for yourself. And again, we'll come back to that. So I wanted to introduce the concept of intersectionality. It's become quite well known, but I always say to my students, it's super important to know where ideas come from, especially when those ideas have come from marginalized bodies, marginalized thinkers, and in this case, African-American women who have not had voice in the academy, who have not had voice in our society. And so when ideas come from those roots, we need to speak to it. We can't just co-opt it and be like, oh, intersectionality. You have to always remember. And also when you go back to the roots, you remember why these ideas were developed, right? Kimberly Crenshaw is extremely clear that this is not just to theorize. This is to change society. This is to change ourselves. If you haven't watched her TED Talk on intersectionality, it's fabulous. She gets her audience participating, and she starts off getting everybody to stand up. And then she starts saying the names of African-American males who have been shot by police in that particular time. Since then, there's been, many, many tragic more. And people are standing and people are standing, few people sitting. Then she switches and she starts talking about the names of African-American women who have been shot. Immediately, everybody sits down. And so she breezes the point. Why is it that African-American males are getting into the media for their killing by police officers, but African-American females are not? And so she said, we have to think intersectionally. And so her work originated out of being a legal scholar, and she found that under the law, you could only file a discrimination case under race or a discrimination case under gender. You could not file a discrimination case for the ways in which gender and race intersect. And a particular example is hair. A lot of African-American women were being discriminated for their hair. And is that because they're in a body of an African-American or a person of African descent, or is that because they're in a body of a female identified? And so intersectionality was this idea, wait a minute, we need the laws to recognize that we are not separate. We cannot say, well, I'm oppressed as a woman, but not this. Or, I'm oppressed as a woman, I don't need to worry about race. Well, that's a very white woman perspective. White women go on and on and on about sexism. But then you say, well, but you also have a lot of privilege. And it sort of throws them, right? Or straight people go on and on about something, and you're like, yeah, but you got straight privilege there. The fact that you never have to think about or say who your partner is or question your identity in that respect. And so intersectionality. And I'm going to just read this because I think it's nice to be read to every now and again. Intersectionality was a prism to bring to light dynamics within discrimination law that weren't being appreciated by the courts. In particular, courts seemed to think that race discrimination was what happened to all Black people across gender, and sex discrimination was what happened to all women. And if that is your framework, of course, what happens to Black women and other women of color is going to be difficult to see. And so I love this idea that it's a lens, it's a prism that enables us to see things that we did not see before, right? So again, let's just pause and kind of take a moment and think about, what are you not seeing, right? What are you being kind of obscured by a particular aspect of your identity? I was almost going to say, what are you being blind to? But I had a colleague point out, that we use disability words in very kind of nonchalant ways. So I'm not going to say, what are you blind to, but what are you not looking at because of a particular privilege or a particular oppression that is obscuring another one? Yeah, and take a deep breath if it helps, right? As we learn, we have to open up space. Okay, so let's segue into questioning again, who are you intersectionally speaking, right? Again, to repeat, intersectionality has always been about challenging inequality or inequalities. It is a theory and a praxis, right? Talking about inequality is one thing. Theory to change inequality, to be more equal, is something else, right? So when we want to change, even in our own lives, right? People will be like, why are you doing that? Why you gotta keep talking about that? And you're like, no, I'm trying to change. I'm trying to become more aware of my implicit bias, my gender stereotyping, my bias against working class people. I'm working on it, but people will react and want to keep you in your spot. So just sort of be aware of that. All right, so this is the chart that I use in all my classes. Doesn't matter the topic. I get my students to engage in this. And so I'm going to give you, I don't know, 5 minutes. And if you're kind of not in this at this moment, what is happening? What if you're like, I don't want to do it, right? What is that, right? Where we're like, I don't need to circle. I know my stuff. But sometimes when we circle and we own and we put it down, things open up. So take a moment, and I don't actually have a clock on me, and maybe 5 minutes is too much. Maybe Joe, we can go like 3 minutes. But literally, if you have a pen and paper, write down or redraw the chart for yourself on a scrap piece of paper. I have a little board here because I've been teaching all semester. Just give yourself a little diagram like this: privilege, oppression, and kind of go, okay, I'm white. Yes, I'm owning it. Okay, I'm male. Yes, I'm able-bodied. I'm straight. I'm middle class. Oh my gosh, I'm all up here. Okay, well, what am I not looking at? What's going on? Or if you have these up here, but maybe, you have some mental health issues. How does that change? What is it like to be a white male with mental health? How does that change your construction of masculinity or of whiteness? What is it like to be a white male with all of the privilege and then you have a stroke? That was my father. My father absolutely could not deal with the fact that he had all these privileges and then he had a stroke. And a lot of males who have had, and white males in particular, privileges, then when they get an oppressed identity, they can't handle it. So take a moment. I'll stop talking and you think about yourself. I'll just look, I'll just check the time. Yeah, so I'm going to put the timer for 3 minutes. Sorry. And if something comes up for you and you need to take a pause, just notice that. If a particular identity has emotion attached to it, if circling it is uncomfortable, just notice that. And then when you're done, think about how they intersect. How do they change each other? All of them. If you're having any feelings, try to identify where. Where are you feeling something? If you're having memories of a wound, of a trauma around a particular identity, just bring some compassion or some awareness that that is what you experienced because of that identity. Okay, I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to do mine, and just so you can sort of think about that. And then hopefully when we go to discussion, we can share. But a lot of this is very personal. I'm just trying to put that. Okay. Can you see my little word? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. So as I said in the beginning, I identify as white. So I have that privilege. I identify as middle class. I have a PhD, so I have educational privilege. But then I also identify as LGBTQ. And so when we think about these intersecting identities, I also have a learning disability. I'm dyslexic, and I can't even spell dyslexic because it's one of the harder words to spell. And it was a trick. It was a very mean trick to call a spelling issue dyslexia. So that's an issue. And so for me, this actually was one of the defining identities of my childhood, right? Being in special ed. And so even though I had white privilege and I was middle class, I got teased a lot as a kid because of a learning disability. And so this identity tends to obscure my privileges. And this is what happens, that the oppressed identities are the ones that we give the most salience to, right? Oh, I'm gay, I'm gay, I'm gay, I'm gay. That's my identity. And I don't often say, well, wait a minute. Yeah, I'm gay, but I'm also white. And it's very different to be a white gay person than a person of color who is also gay. And so we tend to make these the ones that, and society also makes them, right? Society puts the lens down here and makes these ones seem invisible. Because they're easy, they're privileged. And so they don't bring the weight and the wounding and the need to constantly explain and say and identify and justify and have it put under a microscope. Oh, so you're Asian, right? Where are you from? Oh, so you're queer, right? How is that for you? When did you know? Whereas up here, nobody ever says, when did you know you were straight? Nobody ever says, you're white, where are you from? No, you're white, where are you from? And so recognizing how these identities bring this kind of weird, constant imbalance. Okay, let's keep going, and then we're gonna hopefully be able to share. So let's see, we are at 11:33. So let's open it up. Let's look at the questions, and then I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that we can have more camera time. So just take a moment and read these. These were gonna be breakout groups, but we didn't work it out, and I didn't tell the organizers. So we can go around. I just thought it would be fun though to kind of go in order of the way I went through the talk. So the first thing was, who are you? I asked you to kind of think about that. Also, if you do speak, if you could tell us your name and your pronoun. I go by she and her, hers. In the beginning, when I asked you, who are you? Did you say in your mind, oh yeah, I'm white. Oh yeah, I'm middle class. Oh yeah, I'm male. Or did you just go straight to I'm Bill or Phoebe or Jose? Also, thinking about when we get to the chart, if you want to share a reason that you're here, and you can connect things, they don't have to stay separate. The question about how is there racism? How does that make you feel? Depending, again, are you the victim of racism? Are you somebody who benefits from racism? Even if you don't agree with racism, if you are white, you benefit. And that's sometimes hard for social justice whites to admit. Realizing that we cannot address racism unless we also talk about sexism, homophobia, and all the other oppressions. How does that make you feel? Does that frustrate you or make you angry or excite you? And then we can ignore the last one because we're not in breakout groups. Okay, so that's sort of the framework for our discussion. And then we'll come back. I'm going to reshare my slide for one more time at the end. So I'm going to stop share. So let's go around. Who would like to say something or share something?
I can go. Hi, my name is Alyssa Ahrens. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. And when I was first, when you first asked like who I was, being a political science major, race was one of the first things I thought about, not because I have to worry about being white and that necessarily negatively affecting me, but being a political science major, one of the things, we have these really intense discussions all the time. And over this past year, I've had to learn to be very conscious about the space I'm taking up as a white person in those discussions, because my voice is most often the one that is the most heard. And even without meaning to, occupying those spaces, I can overshadow marginalized voices and sort of impose my Western colonial tendencies. So that was just something that one of the reasons I thought about race, and something I've learned to think about over the year. I used to not think about race when I thought about myself. I used to think of myself, as non-binary, as pansexual, as middle class, and those are sort of my identifiers. Racism makes me very, very angry, but unfortunately not surprised, especially in the US. Like, we know it's been here since colonizers came in and committed genocide against the indigenous peoples of North America. And so racism has changed a lot, but it's still very prevalent, and it's still very frustrating to encounter. But it's one of the reasons I chose to study political science.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Yeah. And thanks for that honesty of that you had a stronger identification with being non-binary or pansexual, as opposed to your privileged identity of being white, and that idea of who takes up space, right? Who speaks, who doesn't speak, where do we put our bodies, how do we put our bodies, and becoming more aware. I mean, that's sort of the process, right? And that's sort of the inner work of racial justice, is doing the work that we have to keep reflecting and saying, how am I embodying these identities that I did not choose, that really are not me? I see Sarah in the chat, you put, I had a difficult time seeing myself as defined within the chart. And that whole, in many ways is sort of the spiritual goal, is that we don't identify with these identities, that we transcend them. But then, society holds you back, right? Society will grab you regardless of whether we identify with them or not. When we are in space, we are in a body. We are white, we are a person of color, we are female, we are these identities, whether we give them power or not. So somebody else, thank you for that. And Sarah, if you want to add, I just saw your chat though.
Well, I appreciate this in a way because as my closest friends will let you know, I'm sociology challenged. I've always gone through my life as kind of an individual, and I sort of feel like I belong to every group, which is not, the way others in society necessarily identify. So you do have to be aware of how your footprint is in society. So this is helpful, but I've always resented being put in a box.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I come from, by being anti-discriminatory. And racism really, really makes me furious.
Yeah.
Because putting people in a box, we really are more alike than, whether you're lesbian or gay or whatever. I don't see that.
Yeah.
We're all just people.
Yeah. And so I appreciate that. And sometimes though, we have to look at, being an individual or seeing ourselves as an individual is also a privilege, right? That I can say I'm an individual and I'm going to go against the grain and I'm going to, go against the norm, partly because I have the privilege to do that, right? And so, philosophically, I totally agree with you, but then we also have to remember, that not everybody can be seen as an individual, right? The minute a person of color speaks, it's like, oh, you speak for the race, right? Oh, this person, a gay person did this, all gay people are pedophiles or whatever. But I'm going to keep bouncing around. So thank you for that. A question about where you can get the chart. I can send it to Sherry, but you just Google it. It's intersectionality chart images. There's all kinds of choices. I took a picture off the screen as to how we can share this. Okay, yeah. Somebody else, let's keep it going, bounce off each other. Is there something that came up for you? Go ahead.
I'm a person who has always been interested in social issues. I think what I can attribute.
Can you say who's speaking? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. My name is Leslie Turner. I'm on the Mansfield Democratic Town Committee. I'm the secretary. I grew up in the same town where Ella Grasso grew up, our first female governor in our country who was elected on her own. And I just grew up with a lot of stories about her and how practical she was and how influential she was. I have a brother who's 10 years older. And when I was in middle school, he was taking over the ROTC building at his college, protesting the Vietnam War. I majored in political science. And I'm just interested in social issues, and that's why I attended this.
Nice.
Dinner. I'm also the mother of a child who has special needs. And, since he was in birth to 3 at age 3 or 2.5, and then, he's 23 now.
Yeah, nice.
In the job world, that it's tough.
It is tough. Yeah. And then, again, it's a special need identity. And then, but if you have privilege, that special need can be addressed, right? You can get tutors, you can get support, you can get the right schools. But if you have the intersection of special needs plus your low income, plus you're African American, and so the schools don't necessarily represent you or take you seriously when you're saying my child needs this or my child needs that, and so we start to realize that all of these pieces have to be understood together, right? And that we cannot solve our children's special needs unless we also realize how so many of those children also have a special need because of poverty or because of family trauma or because of structural racism that compounds and makes these even more complicated and difficult to address. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Someone else, how is this, again, the topic of this talk was racism, but how is also thinking about classism, right? What, I said we tend to demonize Republicans, and there's some truth to that, or working class whites, or, Windham County voted for Trump. I live in Willimantic, Windham County went for Trump. Is it enough to say, oh, those people are racist? Or do we need to understand how working class whites have been used and pitted historically against African Americans and pitted against their economic interests in very strategic ways? And is it helpful to continue, to demonize working people who have been kind of shafted in multiple ways, especially if we want to solve, especially if we want to understand, how can we create a more just society? We have to address class inequality.
Absolutely. Phoebe Godfrey, this is Susan John.
Hey, Susan.
Neighbor, and great to, I'm fascinated with your remarks and your presentation. I was a sociology major in college and went on to law school working at legal services with the low-income population who needed legal assistance and healthcare access, and those kinds of things have been the focus of what I've been doing. But one of the things that I've always thought about as a sociology major was the fact that economics and sociology were separated back in the 19th century. And I think that's part of the problem with how we deal with public policy and how we have structural racism in our policies everywhere you look. So I just wanted to say that. I know we're running down on time, but I want to thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And I'd love to have some more chats about these sorts of things and come on my radio show.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, for time, I'm going to share one last slide. And again, I want to emphasize that those thinkers who are shaping my thoughts the most are women of color, right? And this is the time, when the reckoning from those who have been most oppressed by these intersecting identities have the deepest wisdom, and including Indigenous people when it comes to looking at climate change and how we are going to survive as a species. But I wanted to end with Isabella Wilkinson's work from her book Caste, and her idea around radical empathy. We often use empathy of like, oh, so sorry for you. Oh, that sucks for you. Oh, that sucks for you. But I really appreciate her more dynamic and kind of deep embedded notion of empathy, that putting the work to educate and listen with a humble heart and to understand another's experience from their perspective, not just as we imagine we would feel. So if I were you, that's how I would feel, but rather to deeply understand how the others, as she says, radical empathy is not about you and what you think you would do in a situation you have never been in and perhaps never will. It is the kindred connection from a place of deep knowing that opens your spirit to the pain of another as they perceive it, right? Again, think about what is the pain that some working class people have experienced, white working class. What is it that racism serves for them? right? Because everything serves in our identities, right? What are they compensating? How has masculine, what is the problem with being poor and white and male? What's the clash of masculinity and poverty? How do you make up for the fact that you've been told you're male and you should be dominant, and yet you live in a trailer and you're uneducated and you have no options, but you are at least white? Where can you go to feel better about yourself? Well, racism in this country has always provided that solution for poor white males, right? And so, you know, not to take their responsibility, everybody ultimately is responsible for what they choose to embody, but we need to understand how those choices got given to them, right? I can choose that or that, right? Also, she says, empathy is no substitute for the experience. We don't get to tell a person with a broken leg or a bullet wound that they are not in pain. And people who have hit the caste lottery are not in a position to tell a person who has suffered under the tyranny of caste what is offensive or hurtful or demeaning to those at the bottom, right? Again, as we increase our knowledge of racism, we still don't get to be the experts. We don't get to be the ones to define, oh, I know about racism. Oh, yeah, I got that, right? You still have to remember that that's not your experience. And then she says, the price of privilege is the moral duty to act when one sees another person treated unfairly. And the least that a person in the dominant caste can do is not make the pain any worse, right? And again, that means across intersections, right? That means just because you're fighting racism, don't then, you know, be sexist at the same time or be homophobic, okay?
No,
So I think
Phoebe,
that's it. Thank you.
No, and I don't want to cut you off at all.
That's
I'm
okay.
going to let you wrap up, but I think that's why we're here, because we want to know.
Yeah,
we
great.
want to keep talking, even though we're afraid. You know, you asked, what are you feeling? I'm feeling fear. I am feeling that I'll say the wrong thing, and I never want to hurt someone else. So, you know, I think that your wrap up can take us out, and we want to follow up.
Okay, yeah, so my wrap up is, you know, what's your takeaway? What else needs to be discussed? What work do you need to do? What work do we need to do? All right, most social movement work tries to pretend it's about the individual, but it's really about collective action, and then anything else. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I can just jump in. This is Pat Wilson Phoenix, and I just wanted to say how much I appreciated your work and your words. I came to the workshop because I really wanted to hear how, you know, others were thinking about this topic. When you live it, it's it's nice to understand how other people are perceiving it, and that's what I wanted to do, because the work is together. It's not individual. So your comments on intersectionality were particularly meaningful, because that does happen all the time. It's very hard to. A reporter once asked me, was I going to use all of my experience and knowledge, or was I going to use the fact that I was a Black woman at the legislature? And I was kind of dumbfounded by the question.
Yeah.
But that just is an illustration of how people will try to separate from one person.
Yeah, and the reason they can ask that question is because their identities are invisible to them.
Right.
Right. And they assume I'm an objective journalist. I'm an objective, right? Objectivity, as I always argue, it is synonymous with privilege. Only privileged people can be objective.
Yeah.
and of course they're not, right? So
thank you for the
thank
workshop.
Yeah.
And the words and the resources.
Yes, no, absolutely. And if any of you want to email me, I'm happy to follow up or share what I know, or
can you put your information in the chat? Or
absolutely. Yeah, so it's you know, and I think, like I said, I like the word, the moral duty word, and the radical empathy. And as as somebody who has educational privilege, I feel I have a moral duty to share.
You do?
I do, absolutely. We do, right?
We
It
do.
should not just be about my, my CV and where I'm going to get my next grant from. If universities, I'm very involved in service learning, but all of the people who do the community outreach, we are all at the bottom of the heap in academia because you don't get rewarded for social change. Which is, I have to laugh because it's
you don't
just
get rewarded for prevention either.
Yeah, exactly.
In politics.
No, I'm sure it's the same. It's the same game, so it's the same rules, right?
Wow, what an amazing morning. Again, I wish that Phoebe would be my new best friend and that I could listen to your class and maybe if you had a podcast, but I think that it's motivated us and we felt hopefully safe enough to think through some of these really amazing questions. I love that we can Google and find that graphic anywhere. And hopefully we'll take this forward, and I'll be talking with you soon about, something we can offer maybe right in at Click right downtown, and get together and learn more and feel safe and be able to talk about it. So thank you all. As you know, Senator Murphy is going to be speaking at 12:15. So take your bathroom break, get something to eat, and what an amazing day.